All right, hello YouTube. We are back for part 3 of the September Q&A, and yeah, I'm really enjoying doing this. I'm glad that I started up again. So we've got a load of good questions. I'm probably not going to get through all of them, but I will bank them as ideas for videos with some really good questions. So I've listed a bunch of questions in my notes, and we'll get through as many as we can in about half an hour. So hope you're feeling good. Grab yourself a drink, a tea, coffee, a juice, and let's begin. So this question is to do with Dorian Yates's HIT style training. So Johnny Boz asks, how would you perform or modify Dorian Yates's HIT style training? Now, he knows that I'm not a massive fan of Dorian Yates's HIT style training, which is odd because I grew up an hour away from Dorian Yates's Temple Gym, and I was taught nothing but that when I was younger. In fact, I trained like that for many years. But it's because of the familiarity and the fact that I've run it that I feel like I can comment on it. So, first of all, there are a lot of pros. There are a lot of positives to the Dorian Yates HIT style approach, and especially the way that I was taught how to do it. So I specifically remember the first time I was taught how to train with the Dorian Yates approach, and we were doing delts and triceps, class day 3 of the Dorian split. We started off with side laterals. Now, I specifically remember we started with the 5 kilo dumbbells, and the first set we took basically to failure. So it was like 20, 25 reps. Then we dropped them, did the 7.5 kilo dumbbells, again to failure. So that was another, say, 20 reps. So pretty high rep stuff, generating fatigue, all that stuff. And then we did the third set, was with the 10 kilo dumbbells. That was to failure as well, about 15 to 18 reps, whatever it was. Eventually we worked up to the 12s or the 15s, I forget exactly what. And that was the set to failure, because that was the all out set, because that was the one where we did forced reps, negatives. We even, once we'd finished doing the set, we dropped the dumbbells, and the guy who was teaching me, he put his arm like here on my elbows and pushed down while I pushed up. So to really exhaust the muscle. But the first 3 or 4 sets, which were to failure, were just in really high rep ranges and generated fatigue. He didn't count those as sets. So essentially we did about 4 or 5 sets per exercise. Now, I don't want to besmirch anyone from the H.I.T community, but all I'm saying is I was taught by a guy who was taught by Dorian, and that's what he did. That's the first thing. There are a lot of pros. It is a decent amount of volume if you just do the warm-up sets correctly. And it's not as dangerous as you might think if you just get, because by the time you get around to the main set, the blood should be in the muscle, you should be warmed up, and you should be slightly fatigued. I think where guys go wrong now is they'll warm up with sets of 5 or sets of 3, sets of singles or doubles, whatever, just to be fresh for the last set, just so they can get out as much weight. But Dorian always said it's not about the weight, it's about fatiguing the muscle. So he would purposely do quite high reps when he was training, and it worked great. So there are a lot of pros. That's a positive. There's very much an emphasis on form. All those older guys, their form would be pristine, and there was a lot of positives. Okay, now my biggest problem with the HIT approach is everything is one set. That's the biggest problem. It's a uniform amount of volume. That's the issue. So I look at my training. My training is slightly biased towards increased delt and bicep volume, because my delt and biceps are weak areas and I need more volume for them. But if you're doing 1 or 2 sets to failure for every exercise, it makes it a lot more difficult to spread the volume where you need it. And that's my issue. Okay, that's my problem. Most people go into routine, even if it's like a 3x10 routine, and they'll do a uniform amount of exercises. That problem is exacerbated when you're doing very low volume training, because you just have far less to go on. So if you need, say, 15 sets to increase the size of your delts, okay, or 20 sets to increase the size of your bicep, you're nowhere near that if you're doing 1 set to failure. Now, if you're doing 3 sets of 10 of everything on a regular, generic kind of bodybuilding split, then yeah, you'll probably come close, 12 to 15 sets. Some it'll be too much, some it'll be too little, but you're in the ballpark. The problem with the one or two set to failure thing is you're probably maxing out at 8 to 10 sets per body part per week. And if you need 15 or 18 or 20, which I find most regular people do, they need more work to improve a body part once they're intermediate, then you're stuck. And a lot of what happens with the Dorian Yates approach, at least for the guys around here, is they just end up having to use other vectors to make progress. And I'm going to talk about this in a video at some point because it's an important topic. Rather than using the training to drive the hypertrophy, they end up using other things, and then they think the training's working, but in fact it's the other things they're doing. Now, what can you do to force strength increases? What do you think, guys? You can force feed yourself. That's one thing. Excessive amounts of food or drugs. So what do you think? You tell me in the comments. If you've got a whole bunch of people and they're past the beginner stage, okay? So I don't really count beginners in this because they can do pretty much whatever they like. So if some guy wants to say, HIT work for me, and I bench a plate and a half, I squat 2 plates, 3 plates even, I deadlift 4, not to put down those strength lifts, but who cares at that point? You could do anything to get to those lifts. It doesn't really matter. But when you've got a guy who's got to an advanced stage status and built a good physique, most of the time they're not doing that with a low volume approach. And if they are, in my experience, they tend to be quite genetically gifted. I do know some guys who grow really well from a low volume approach, and they're monsters. There's a couple of guys around here where I live, one in particular who grows very well with a low volume approach. He's got all the potential to be a pro, but that's the difference. Like, he is wired to train with a low volume approach. He can get more out of 1 set than I can get out of 5, just because of the way he's built. Nothing to do with his focus. It's just the way he's built. He's just bull strong, and he has the structure and the tendons to be able to get the most out of a very low amount of volume. In fact, if he was to do more work, it'd probably overtrain him pretty quickly. Most of us don't have that problem. Most of us need more work because we don't have sufficiently strong joint and ligament structures. So my issue is most people need certainly varying amounts of volume for different body parts, but almost definitely the average volume needs to be higher. Most people just need to put in more work to be better. And if we just pull that back to any activity, think back to when you're at school. Think about the subjects you did really well in. Yeah. Now, odds are the subjects you did really well in are the ones which you actually didn't do quite as much in as the ones you did really poorly in. Like me, I'll give you my example. I was always pretty good at math, very good at computers. And I didn't need a great deal of practice on those things. I was just gifted at them. You know, my degree was in computer science and I was just gifted with computers. Even from an early age, I remember writing my first program when I was like 12 years old. So it wasn't something which I needed to put a great deal of extra effort in to get to a good baseline. So just to summarize my issues with the Dorian Yates HIT style approach before we move on to solutions. My main criticism is most people need a higher overall amount of volume, and everyone needs a variety of different volumes. Even the genetically gifted guy that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, even he needs more work for his weaker areas like hamstrings. So it says something. Now, how would I adapt it? How would I modify it? Just quite simply, experiment with where you need more volume. And you might say to me, how do I experiment? How do I set it up? Quite simple, really. When you do, let's start with a base. Start with a baseline of start with a typical Dorian split. Low volume, 1 or 2 sets per exercise, whatever you want, okay? That's the first thing. I think probably a sensible change would be, rather than doing 1 set to failure with negatives and forced reps, just do 2 sets. Start with that per exercise, okay? 1 heavy set, 1 lighter set. Just a typical like Jordan Peters style of approach. Start there, okay? Then, during the course of the week, see what areas are getting a good pump, see what areas are getting sore, see what areas are getting disrupted, and don't add to those, okay? So if you do, say, 4 exercises for the chest for 2 sets each, and your chest feels battered, like, that's enough. That's cool. That's okay. Now, if you do 4 sets for the biceps and they don't even feel like you've trained them, you probably need more. So that's the first metric. First metric is see how the muscle feels after having trained like that. The second metric is then to look at strength increases. Are you able to make strength increases reliably and relatively consistently? So the way that I know if my program's working is, let's say I got 8 reps last week. This week I get to 8 and I feel like I could do one more with the same degree of effort that I got 8 last week. That's progression, okay? Because you don't want to try harder to get more reps. You want the reps to just arrive because your training last week worked. And it's a key tenet of progressive overload. Progressive overload is not like adding 2.5 kilos to the bar does not get you stronger. Being able to add 2.5 kilos to the bar is the result of what you did last week, which got you bigger and stronger, right? So you have to gauge your training based on that. And if you're not able to consistently get bigger and stronger, something is wrong. And if you're a natural and you're not committed to force feeding yourself lots and lots of food to make gains, well, you've got to be very honest with yourself about whether the training is working or not. In my experience, beginners, early intermediates can do pretty much anything as long as they're gaining weight, as they're training hard. Where this kind of falls down is later on, most people need more volume. So that's kind of how I would modify it, okay? I would start with a baseline of low volume, perhaps miss the force reps and negatives, just do a couple of sets to failure per exercise, and then from there, judge whether you need increased volume or not based on the feel of your muscles during the course of the week, whether they feel trained or not, and also your progression. Typically, very typically, if you are doing everything right outside the gym, so you're eating right, you're sleeping, you're resting, and you train and you are not sore, so there's no soreness, no pain at all, you're recovering fine, you get to next week and you didn't progress, odds are you probably need more training. You probably need more volume. So if 8 sets for chest means you're not able to reliably, consistently get at least 1 or 2 more reps per week, that means something in the chain is broken down. It could be your food, it could be your sleep, it could be your stress, or it could be the amount of volume you need. Now, conversely, if you do, say, 12 to 15 sets and you're just sore all the time, your joints feel sore, your got elbow tendonitis, probably doing too much, you need to pull back. Just use that as a very simple gauge. For a lot of people, it just doesn't tend to be enough. So that's the one thing. I suppose there's one more factor I would say as well. This kind of relates back to pulling back the intensity. The obsession that these HIIT guys have with the negatives and the force reps and all the additional intensifiers is very much misplaced. They're looking for fatigue rather than stimulus. I don't think any of that is necessary at all. I think if you just do more volume, that will give you more of a magnitude. I think when you're in a mindset where you can only do 1 set per exercise, it locks you in. It boxes you in to a very limited worldview of what you can manage. Now, if you only have 1 set, the only way to increase the stimulus, this is what Dorian thought, the only way to increase the stimulus is to go beyond failure, because all you've got is 1 set. Like, he's put himself in a box where all he can do is 1 set. So therefore, to make that set more and more productive, he has to do more and more. He has to do the force reps, the negatives, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you break out of that box, it's simpler just to add more sets. Just do a second set, do a third set. Hell, go nuts, do a 4th and a 5th set. That's more stimulus. It accomplishes the same thing, but it accomplishes it without the neural and systemic stress that comes with force reps and negatives, and also the injury potential as well. So it just makes sense. It's just a bit silly to box yourself into doing 1 set per exercise. And for that reason, because the amount of volume of training you're doing is so low, you have to pull out all these tricks like force reps, negatives, drop, all that kind of stuff. Like, just do more work. We're in the gym because we enjoy being there. Just do more work. Like, broaden your horizon. You don't have to do 1 set. So, Johnny, hopefully that answers your question. We are 16 minutes in. We're going to move on to the next question. All right. So, Daniel says scapular retraction and depression on bench is pretty universally coached, but Eugene Teo recommends against it because he says it deactivates the serratus. That's an interesting term. leading to shoulder injuries, and the guy at Brazos Valley Strength says it's counterproductive because you're activating antagonist muscles to the ones you're supposed to be using. What's your take? Firstly, I have no idea who either of those people are. I don't know who Eugene Teo is or who the guy at Brazos Valley Strength is. So I won't comment on them in particular because I've no clue what they say, and I can't corroborate that that's what they said. But I'll just comment generally on that because I do know people have been saying that over the last couple of years. The long and short of it is, I think it's very short-sighted. I just think they're wrong. I think this is an example of making a blanket statement to appeal to a lot of people, to be very divisive. I guess if I wanted to be very divisive and gain a lot of views, I might start off a video by saying something like, rounding your back in the deadlift doesn't matter. Maybe something like that. Yeah, just something which I know is going to be controversial and is a blanket statement. I'll say, or maybe I'll start the video off by saying, everybody should round their back on deadlifts, something like that. So something which is situationally true, but is not true for everyone. And what I should say is, rounding your back is the way that everyone should deadlift, because I deadlifted like that when I was powerlifting. So that could make for a great video. You get a lot of views. Some people would say I'm talking rubbish. Some people would agree with me. Some people in the middle who aren't very certain will go to one of the camps, will be forced to make a choice because they're presented with a very divisive opinion. So that, oh, I have to think about this. Yeah, okay, I'll believe Faz. Some other people are like, oh no, I hate it. But what will happen is everybody will talk about it because, oh, this YouTube producer has made this big statement, and then it'll start to gain traction. And some people will respond to it favorably, some people respond to it negatively. It just starts to get views and clicks, and it's a very good way of doing that. But that's not, I don't think that's very helpful for people. Again, I don't know who these people are, but whoever they are, I have heard it said. It's normal. The one guy that I have heard saying this very vocally over the last couple of years is just a bit of a known idiot in the industry. No one really respects him, and he's just quite low IQ, to be honest. I think if you make blanket statements like this, unless you are just a bit thick, you're probably doing it because you want to gain views, because it's very divisive. Look, Daniel, you're asking me about this. It gets people talking, doesn't it? My opinion on this is that it's going to vary on the individual. I'll say this. This was from about 12 years ago. One of my old training partners, I used to train with the powerlifting crew. He would say, you've got to bench with your fists straight like this, okay? Whereas I would bench with my wrist back a little bit. And this is another example of one of those situations where what works for one person might not work for the other. I did all my heaviest benches with my wrist just cocked back a little bit. I was using a regular grip. My wrist was cocked back a little bit. And he said, Faz, you shouldn't do that. Everybody should bench like this. So there's just too many instances of really good benchers benching with their wrists slightly cocked back. There are advantages to that. There are disadvantages as well. But like anything in life, there are pros and there are cons. And I think when it comes to these people who are making this argument, I'm sure they're intelligent people, because obviously if you're talking about him, he must be fairly famous. But there is a certain group of people, and I've talked about this before, they're not unintelligent, but they lack the ability to process nuance. And there's a major difference there. You can be intelligent, but lack the ability to process nuance. The nuance in this case is people are different. So maybe he lacks that nuance. Maybe he's just saying it for clicks and views. Who knows? But no, I think it's one of those things where it very much depends on the individual. I think there was some intelligent discussion on this topic on, I think it was Alpha Destiny's channel, where he was discussing this. I'm pretty sure it was. I can't remember. But he very much has the same opinion as I do about this, and that is, it's going to depend on your structure. I would guess, if I was to guess at this, okay, based on my experience and the people I've coached over the years, I would guess that if you are more longer limbed, you probably have to retract quite a lot, because longer limbed individuals tend to be less barrel chested. So it makes sense that you have to really tuck your shoulder blades in to protect your shoulder joint. Now, if you are more barrel chested with a shorter arm, range of motion is less. It probably means you can let your shoulders loose a little bit, and that might be helpful for you. Whereas if you've got a long monkey arm like I do, then to pull your shoulders back really reduces the range of motion and allows you to puff your chest out, and you can lose a couple of inches of range of motion just by doing that, which is highly beneficial for the bench press, especially if you're trying to lift a lot of weight. Now, if you're a barrel chested lifter, perhaps you could take advantage of not depressing the scapula I don't know, perhaps that will have a better position for you. That's what I would guess. But in the end, I think it's going to be some kind of structural difference rather than saying everybody has to do it the same way. I think that's, as I say, I think they're either very intelligent people and they're doing it for clicks and views, or they're a bit slow and a bit low IQ and they just don't understand. They don't have the ability to grasp. That's what I think. Sorry if I'm being a bit mean. I don't know who these people are and I'm speaking more in general, but that's my opinion on that. Okay, so we're going to cover both these questions at the same time because they're quite similar questions. So Paul Velasquez says, I'm curious in your thoughts about gaining 1 pound a month as opposed to 2 or even 3. Will I be able to gain strength as quickly on this smaller surplus? And his idea is he could stay in the bulk longer. Now, Billy, who's one of my clients, said, do you think you can hit a plateau in regards to strength and hypertrophy after being in a calorie deficit or a maintenance for an extended period of time, even when your body fat is still higher? So basically what we're talking about here, just to sum both of these conversations up. Now, when you're trying to improve your strength and your muscle in the gym, there are two related but separate vectors that you can use to progress, okay? And this is a really important point. Like, this is a very important point, so I want you guys to pay attention to this, right? You can force gains via your training, or you can force gains via pushing body weight, or you can do a combination of both. So the reason why most people won't recomposition very well and they won't gain very well on a small amount of weight gain surplus is because the first vector, that is the training, is, I was going to swear there, but the training is bad. The training is not sufficient. So they have to rely on the weight gain to push the strength and the mass up. You see what I'm saying? There are two vectors for improving yourself in the gym: your training or forcing food. Ideally, you should do both, okay? If you want to recomposition, or Paul is doing gain very slowly, or Billy is doing gain in a deficit or at maintenance, then you really have to push training. Your training has to be top-notch. Usually, sufficient volume is the main problem that people have. They do very low volume routines. Or, if you want to progress, you have to push your body weight up. Now, the issue with that is, so here are some scenarios. Let's say you really push your body weight up, but your training is insufficient. Okay, what does that mean for us? That means over the course of a 12, 16, 20-week training cycle, if you're bulking and you're gaining reliable amounts of weight, your strength will go up. Okay, it will, because your body weight is rising. Because your body weight is rising, you're going to gain some leverage. You're also going to gain some fat. You're also going to gain some muscle. Like, whenever your body puts on weight, some of that will be muscle. All we do with training is we improve the partitioning of muscle and fat. So let's say you're gaining weight, but your training's crap. That's what's going to happen. You're going to gain some small amount of muscle, but the majority of it will just be leverage increases and you'll gain. Now, what happens when you cut and you start to take all that off? You'll see that, firstly, you've not built a great deal, but also you lose the advantage of the weight gain. And all of a sudden, you start to hemorrhage muscle because you never were training in the right play, in the right way to begin with. Now, let's give another scenario. Let's say your diet is mostly at maintenance, but your training is superb. Not only is it intense, but also the volume is sufficient. In that case, you will recomposition. That's how it works. Now, in another scenario, if both you are gaining weight and your training is great with plenty of volume, you'll do everything well. You'll gain weight and you'll progress very fast. So this all boils down to the statement that I'm going to say, which is that you can accomplish both of these things, but your training has to be top-notch. Now, Billy, I know your training is top-notch because I train you. Paul, I don't know what kind of training routine you're on, but it needs to be tailored to how much volume you require for every single body part. So it has to be completely and entirely tailored to you. Like with Billy, for example, we've messed around and played around with different volume for different body parts based on how he feels progress is and based on his numbers. So I've completely tailored his training to him. So he's gaining at a good rate. And with him, we've added in some extra calories, so he'll continue to gain further. So those are the two vectors for improvement: body weight and your training. I should also say at this point as well, this is related to a video I'm going to put in together at some point. I also think recomposition is probably not for you if you haven't established a good track record of gaining muscle yet. So like Billy, he's a relative beginner. I think for Billy, he needs to gain weight for him to gain substantial muscle. Not because I don't think he trains hard, because I've seen his videos, he does, but he's not yet established a track record of gaining. So I want to give him all the advantages possible. That is weight gain and good training. Paul, I don't know your situation. I have seen you on Instagram, but I've not really paid attention to like your training or how much muscle you've gained. So if you have a good track record of gaining muscle, you and I have never worked together, but if you have, that's fantastic. And you probably can gain quite well in a small surplus. But it's one of those things where probably the situation that I see the most is people will really push weight gain, but their training is just shockingly bad. Starting strength, anyone? Go mad, anyone? Classic example. Training is sub-calories are extortionately high, and all that happens is you get people on these like ridiculous frog tech bulks where they just get fat. Yeah, not great. But yeah, as I say, the majority of the time with recompositioning and gaining in a small surplus, whatever, your training not only has to be top notch, but you have to have a track record of doing what it takes to gain. Okay, if you can do that, if you have got that in the bank, then you're good. Like right now, I'm recompositioning and I have a track record of gaining muscle. So I have no problem doing that. I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what my sleep needs to be like, what my stress needs to be like, what my diet needs to be like, what my training needs to be like. I need exactly how much volume I need for everything. As a result, I can reliably go to the gym and get stronger every week, even when I'm recompositioning or even when I'm losing weight. But you have to have those things in check. So that hopefully answers your question. We have hit roughly the half an hour mark, so I'm going to call it there. There was one more question, but we'll have to take that in the next one. So hopefully you guys found that useful, and I will speak to you in the next one. Right. Cool. Just to round this out, if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Approximately half people who watch my videos haven't yet subscribed. So I think it's about 55-45 split. So plenty of you don't. So do subscribe, like the video, share it, ask me some questions down below. I'll do another Q&A next month as well. And as I say, there were a ton of questions. So more than likely, some of them will end up being videos of their own rights. But I'll probably do one more Q&A for this month, which will be part 4. Yeah, loads of good questions. Anyway, guys, hopefully that was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.